Welcome to the C.S. Joseph podcast. So, overall, I've just been super busy and looking forward to this particular lecture. Because with this particular lecture, which is the deadly sin of gluttony, I get to sit here and complain about my sister for an hour. It's going to be fantastic. Because, she's an ESFJ and gluttony is definitely her deadly sin. In fact, why don't I just kick this off right now with a nice example from childhood. My sister and I were unhealthily obsessed with this cereal called Nesquik cereal. To me, it was the greatest cereal ever made. Highly processed, monosodium glutamate. Like, you could probably get cancer from eating Nesquik cereal. And for some reason, it's literally a dessert. In fact, it's even worse than dessert because it's not a true dessert because it's not even food. It's a food-like substance, right? But dang, does it taste good. And it tastes really good. Especially after you have you pour the milk in, it just becomes this amazing satisfying chocolate milk experience on top of this chocolate cereal. It's like the ultimate chocolate cereal. There's no greater chocolate cereal than Nesquik cereal. That's for sure. And my sister and I, we're both conflict types. And, my cognitive origin is satisfaction. Her cognitive origin is discovery. And discovery people really like to discover every inch of every single thing they touch in their life. That means if they have a flavor they like, they want to explore every possibility of that flavor. And combining that flavor or trying to see if they could taste the same thing over and over again to see if they can get different notes or different finish or different starting, on their palate, with discovery types are true connoisseurs. Discovery types being ESFJ and INTP. And my sister and I would compete for this cereal on a regular basis to the point where it would actually become violent. It would escalate to violence. It would escalate to hitting between my sister and I. And as she's 4 years younger, and it got pretty bad. It was always as soon as we got up in the morning, it was a race to see who could get to the cereal first. I, of course, taking it from a satisfaction point of view, but she wants to discover every single molecule of this cereal every morning. And I didn't know what was going on at the time, and I do regret, being, physically violent towards my sister and her being physically violent towards me whenever we'd have these crazy fights together. I mean, that was just kind of like a normal thing for us, much to the chagrin of our parents who absolutely hated it. My dad would constantly say, you two are so ridiculous, all you do is try and out-selfish one another, and he was right. And my sister being an ESFJ, that was super hard for me because my ISFJ subconscious already doesn't have any room or space within the family, so I'm already outcast, but then she's moderately accepted because then the greater affiliative of my nuclear family that I grew up in really support, they were all three FJs. Got three different FJs in my face. It's one of the reasons why I just can't handle FJs very well, with the exception of INFJs. But yeah. But the sheer competition, it's like my sister treated this Nesquik cereal as this great frontier for her to explore, and it would happen on a regular basis, on a daily basis. So that became an issue. But it didn't stop with Nesquik cereal, and it also certainly didn't start with Nesquik cereal. That's just how it was. Every single day of our life, literally. It didn't have to be Nesquik cereal. It could be Burger King Cinnamonies. You guys remember those Burger King Cinnamonies? They probably still have them. Gosh, I was obsessed with those. No wonder I got to 300 pounds by the time I was 14 years of age. The deadly sin of gluttony. My sister's deadly sin. It's always so difficult. It's always so difficult to actually consider ESFJs as gluttonous. It's extremely hard. ESFJs are some of the most self-sacrificing, most giving people out there that you would ever meet. Seriously. And like the idea that these people are gluttonous, it's extremely difficult to even conclude that about them. But it's a fact. It's absolutely true. Now, however, if you look at INTPs, doesn't matter if they're men or women, by default, it's pretty easy to see that they're gluttonous. And it's not just gluttonous about food, it's gluttonous about anything. It's like, remember how I'm constantly bagging on INTPs about dopamine and how they always are needing dopamine? Well, the dopamine is that they are gluttonous for dopamine, for example, right? Very gluttonous from that point of view. Let's see. So INTPs, I mean, it goes without saying that INTPs are gluttonous. They're the people who will spend like 1 to 2, 24 hours like straight playing a video game, you know, and they'll just get completely lost in it, right? That SI child loves to just get waxed by dopamine, right? Loves to get waxed by it. So that's literally basically what they're doing. And it's so interesting too, because if you think about it, these two types out of all the 16 types are the types that actually struggle the most with drug addiction. Not necessarily drug use, but drug addiction. They have a very hard time kicking the habit once it becomes a habit. I know an INTP who likes to indulge in cocaine, and his, I think he's at $500 a week right now for his cocaine habit, but it's horrible. And he spends most of his money just on that, constantly, you know, sniffing it up. And it's just like, wow, dude, like, that's all there is to your life? It's just the gluttony just gets completely out of control. Completely out of control. You know, like, I've really hammered this subject so much that, like, I even actually dreaded filming this lecture because I'm just so bored of talking about it. Talking about the mother's basement archetype for men. You know, but gluttony, again, it doesn't have to be food, it doesn't have to be video games, it could be drugs, it could be sex, it could be alcohol, it just doesn't matter. It could be Magic the Gathering, which, you know, I do know a few INTPs who play Magic the Gathering locally, and they spend entire paychecks on cards, and I'm just like, dudes, why? Stop. It's not necessary, you know, so... But it's a thing. It's definitely a thing. It's definitely something that keeps happening. And given that we live in a culture where people's attention spans are reduced, we have constant dopamine from social media and Netflix and video games and pornography, it's extremely difficult for these types to cope. It is extremely difficult for these types to cope within Western society or within the digital age. And that's a huge problem. Very huge problem. Very huge problem for them. Very huge problem for the future. Because without ESFJs and without INTPs, we're really stuck as a race. Chris Taylor talks about how the human race really hasn't learned anything in a very long time. The human race is basically frozen, and we're basically eating ourselves. I mean, the human race has this thing called manifest destiny that is built into it as a race. And manifest destiny, like, for example, is what brought humanity to the New World after it was rediscovered. In ancient times, it was hella populated by humanity in ancient times, like pre-Noah's flood and whatnot. But then it had to be rediscovered, and the New World was rediscovered again, and then it was populated again after the fact. But it was a frontier. It was a whole new frontier. Now, on this planet, every single inch of land has basically been discovered and ultimately claimed, which sucks. And I mean, are we gonna try to look at how things are? Is there a frontier in the subterranean area, you know, underground? Is there a frontier underneath the sea? Well, it's kind of hard to do that without destroying the ecology of the sea, because the sea is very sensitive, and we rely on sea, you know, for like food and salt and like water, like resources. Like, it's a resource area that we don't really want to mess with. We don't want to mess with the ecosystem of the oceans, even though oftentimes human beings do. Because of that, there really isn't that much of a frontier anymore on the earth. And because of that, humanity is starting to get cabin fever. It's starting to get stir crazy. It's like a huge problem. This is one of the reasons why Elon Musk, who is an INTP, who does struggle with the deadly sin of gluttony, and his cognitive origin is also discovery, invested so much of his money into SpaceX, 50% of his money actually, according to his story, into SpaceX, with the dream of ultimately arriving on Mars. He's trying to open up the frontier into the solar system. Like, if you guys go on Amazon Prime and you watch the 6 seasons of the show Expanse, which I highly recommend you do because it's amazing, but The Expanse is an amazing show. Elon Musk is going out of his way to spend the rest of his life on getting to the frontier that is our solar system. It is the next frontier. And humanity right now has this cabin fever, it has this stir craziness. And cabin fever and stir crazy really impacts ESFJs and INTPs in a very negative way. Although most of the time people don't realize that, because if you look at like SP types, for example, like ESTP or ISFP or ESFP, ISTP, these types are the ones who overtly react to being stir crazy. But the types that absolutely cannot handle being stir crazy or get cabin fever ultimately are ESFJs and INTPs. Now, y'all are like, no way, Mr. CS Joseph, no way that's true. Well, here's the thing. If you're an INTP and you're in your mother's basement, and if you explored like every inch of a video game, for example, like an MMORPG, and there's really nothing left to do, and they're not releasing new content or new patches or whatever, you're just going to get insanely bored. And that's when you start going stir crazy. It's not necessarily your physical location, it's just whatever frontier that you had before that you were exploring is gone, basically. And that's how the stir craziness comes in. That's where the cabin fever comes from. That's oftentimes when you look at maritime culture is a very ESFJ, INTP dominated a culture. You know, anytime you talk about explorers in the past, they're usually ESFJs and INTPs. Look at Lewis and Clark. One of those two dudes was either an ESFJ or an INTP, for absolute sure. Definitely a crusader, definitely part of this dyad, basically. So we're seeing how this is, you know, very evident on a consistent basis. So how do they deal with the stir craziness? Well, ESFJs and INTPs, because they're part of the body temple. The body temple is all about legacy. The body temple understands the most. It understands the most about manifest destiny, which is this need, or this. It's really a need. It's not so much a want. It's a human need to explore. And no one experiences the human need to explore more so than an ESFJ or an INTP. They absolutely have to have it. They have to have it. Because without it, there's no meaning to life. There's no meaning whatsoever. Because they need a frontier. They need a frontier. They need to be able to explore it. And part of mapping it and exploring whatever frontier that is, it could be something as simple as Nesquik cereal, or something as complex as getting to Mars, or something as even more complex as the theory of relativity, which was proven true in 2020. You guys should look that up. It's kind of fascinating to me that Einstein was not like reverse awarded a Nobel Prize for the fact that his theory of relativity was actually proven true. And guess what? He too is an INTP. So it could be metaphysical or abstract concepts like the theory of relativity as like a particular frontier, right? It's all about a frontier, you know, and you know, it's really interesting. Like, you go to Disneyland, you go to Frontierland, for example. ESFJs and INTPs love them some Frontierland. They love anything related to the gold rush. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's all about that. Don't forget they have that secondary deadly sin of greed as well. You know, and you could think, you know, that Elon Musk, while his primary deadly sin is gluttony, the secondary deadly sin of greed, you guarantee he's like wondering to himself what kind of resources are available for humanity to tap, what kind of treasures are available for humanity to tap in our solar system. And that's like, whoa, holy smokes. That's a very, very fascinating point of view. So anyway, the point is that an INTP and an ESFJ always need a frontier. And like if you're in a relationship with them, or you are raising them, or you're very close to them, if you need to get them a frontier, or make sure they have some aspect of a frontier in their life. If they don't have that, then they're going to end up going to two different ways, and that's where we start talking about shadow poles versus aspiration poles, and that too can be a huge problem. The shadow pole of I think it's servility, and then like the aspiration pole of hedonism. Although those might be reversed, I'll have to verify that, but I don't think so. And it's like, hey, if there's no frontier, if there's nothing left to explore, well, then I'm just going to be a hedonist. And all they care about is sex, drugs, rock and roll. And, may the good times come, and that's all there is, because there's nothing left to explore. It's like, wow, I'm in a shark tank. I've grown to the size of the shark tank. I don't want to be in captivity. I want to be in the ocean, right? That's what these types are all about. My grandfather actually, he's an ISTP, and he knew this about my ESFJ grandmother. He knew of her need to explore. In fact, that's actually how he romanced her. He romanced her by capitalizing on her need to explore. So he'd do really interesting things with my grandmother. To get in good with my grandmother. He'd make these really fascinating dates for her. Take her on dates. And it was always some kind of frontier-oriented, or something that had to be explored. So he would take her exploring. The best example of exploring he ever did is that one time he was just reading. He saw a magazine on the table that my grandmother had just left out. And it's one of her travel magazines. If there's something about ESFJs, like ESFJs are constantly on vacation. All the time. They go on vacation more than anyone. They like to make it look like, they're working really hard, or they're really tired and they need a vacation. Nope. They're just trying to satisfy their cognitive origin of discovery. That's all it is. That's all it is. No one wants to travel more than an ESFJ, and ultimately an INTP. Although an INTP likes to travel in metaphysical realms, whereas the ESFJ likes to travel in physical realms or concrete realms. Hence, they're constantly going on cruises, constantly going on vacation, constantly going to Vegas, constantly going to the Grand Canyon, constantly looking at everything. Everything is all about exploration and discovery to these people. My grandfather saw this travel magazine that my grandmother left out for him, and and she had it open, and it was open to a page to Crescent City or whatever. He's never been to Crescent City, and the beach looked really nice. So the following day, he went up to my grandmother and he's like, "Hey, let's go for a drive." And she's like, "Okay." So she gets in the car with him. They go on a drive. And 45 minutes after they started their drive, she's like, and they're up in northern Washington State. They're north of Seattle at this point. And she's like, "So where are we going?" And he said, "Well, we're going to go to Crescent City." And she's like, "Crescent City? That's in California." And he's like, "Yep." And he kept on driving. They didn't pack anything. They packed absolutely nothing. When they got down there, they went and bought some clothing to be on the beach, grabbed some food, got a hotel, had a great time at the beach at Crescent City, California. And that's probably, my grandmother told me, and she's like 91 right now, she told me that was the greatest thing that my grandfather ever did for her, is doing stuff like that. Whenever I talk to an ESFJ woman, I tell them this story, they all swoon. They all swoon over that. So hey, if you're dating an ESFJ woman, if you're married to an ESFJ woman, take a page out of my ISTP grandfather's playbook and get it done. Seriously, your life will be better off for it. I promise. Very much promise. Because without the frontier, what do they do? It's all about hedonism, or they become servile, where they just become these insane slaves or servants. That's all where they could draw their sense of self-worth at that point, which is ultimately a problem. It's a big deal. And that kind of sucks. Kind of sucks a lot. So be aware of this. Be aware of this issue. Be aware Like, without a frontier in the relationship, without a frontier in their life, these people will either choose to be overly consumptive, and that's all there is to them, and that's all there is to their life. This is why INTP men, especially, are consistently rejected and consistently overlooked by women, because they're often obese, and all they care about is discovering their frontiers, their video games. Now, sometimes they meet women online that are playing the games too, and then they end up developing relationships with them, oftentimes ENFJ women, for example. And they end up having those long-term relationships with the ENFJ women who also love to be exploring with their SE child, for example. But they really just don't end up going anywhere in life. They never actually have a high-value woman because they themselves are not high-value because they are hedonistic, right? My brother-in-law, he's an INTP, and I guess step-brother-in-law, and he is absolutely worthless. No offense to him. He doesn't want to go to school. He doesn't care about school. He's in high school right now. And he's like, I'd rather be homeless. So I could just be content with nothing. Well, I'm not sure SI child will be able to handle that for a while, but seriously, like, he's so into his marijuana, he's so into his video games, constantly playing Call of Duty, that's all he cares about, and there's nothing else that he cares about. It's all about idolatry. Hedonism just absolutely plagues his life. Or another INTP man that I know, working a dead-end job. This is the archetype of that one INTP in that movie Office Space who gets put into the basement with his desk because he's still working at the company, even though he's not even giving a paycheck, because his entire life's purpose is based upon serving and ultimately being a slave for this company, even though he's not even getting paid, because he's based his entire life around that job, basically. And this is what happens to INTPs and ESFJs if they don't have a frontier to explore. And that's just the worst case. So remember, when you have these people in your life, you need to make sure, or if you are an ESFJ or an INTP, you have to make sure that you have something to explore. Just make sure it's a healthy thing to explore, right? That's why I tell INTPs, go explore Argentina. It will force you out of the house. You'll lose body fat quickly because you're constantly walking. And not only that, you'll have to learn a new language, and it's completely new to you. Go do it. Same thing with ESFJs. You gotta do it. It's super, super important. So, that's it for my introduction. Let's get down to it. Deadly sins. So, remember folks, like, when I say deadly sin, living virtue, I'm not always saying that the deadly sin is a bad thing. So yeah, gluttony is not necessarily always a bad thing. In as much as the living virtue of generativity, or being generative, or productive, right? It's not to say that that living virtue is always a good thing either. They have bad or good aspects to each of them, right? And remember, the purpose of a deadly sin and a living virtue is just an avenue with which an INTP or an ESFJ can walk in order to gain that which they desire the most, which is exploration, aka discovery. That is what they're seeking out of life more than anything. That is their cognitive origin. And remember, folks, cognitive origins do not change, regardless how much you cognitive transition, regardless of anything that you do in your life. They just don't change. With the exception of maybe head trauma. I've seen it one time in my life where there was somebody who was like, for example, an ENTJ, and then they went INTP, and they had a lot of greed about them, a lot of, that cognitive origin of purpose, and then all of a sudden their cognitive origin became exploration or discovery because of some severe head trauma. But that's the only time I've seen it change. Otherwise, it just doesn't change. You can rely on the cognitive origin, and that's why cognitive origins are the absolute best thing to utilize when typing other people. Right? So what are the ESFJ and INTP dyads seeking? What is their origin? What causes the deadly sin of gluttony to emerge? Literally, it's just exploration lacking leads to consumption. If there is no frontier, then I'm just going to consume instead, because if there's nothing to explore, then consumption is the only other thing left in life. So that basically means that this dyad is seeking discovery, as we've already discussed. So let's define discovery. Discovery is the act or process of seeing, finding, or gaining knowledge of something previously unknown. If ESFJs and INTPs don't have a frontier to explore, they ultimately end up consuming. Discovery means being on the cutting edge, a new theory, invention, or the creation of a new family. Keeps ESFJs and INTPs interested enough to stave off their deadly sin of gluttony. There's a new frontier to explore. I mean, like, think about how hedonistic Elon Musk would be after he's accomplished being the richest man in the world, if he wasn't chasing this dream of Mars. You know, I guarantee you he cares way more about SpaceX than he cares about Tesla. That's for absolute sure. He cares way more about it, because that dream is why he gets up in the morning every single day, right? It means everything to him. Note that the body temple happens to be the most concrete of the 4 temples. The origins of discovery, though shared with the abstract INTP, still requires a physical element. Because Elon Musk, for example, is looking for the physical element of exploring the solar system, extracting resources from the solar system, getting to Mars, exploring Mars, etc. Potentially also the moon. Think about what's going to happen when Elon Musk is the first person, or his team is the first people to land on the moon again. Imagine SpaceX going to the moon after all that time. You know, private individuals, not a nation, not a country, private individuals going to the moon. That would be fantastic. Setting up a moon mining operation. Imagine what kind of treasures are buried underneath the moon. Who knows? Then all of a sudden, all those people who claim that the moon is hollow, and it's funny because it's usually INTPs are the ones making that claim, they should just be happy there's a new frontier to explore. Why not? Let's colonize the moon. Let's unlock the secret to generating any amount of gravity that we need. Let's do it. That'd be awesome. You know, human beings need air to breathe. We need heat. We need food. We need water. We need sunlight. But we also need gravity. So, that's important. So, all these things are physical things. The body temple is all about legacy and leaving a legacy behind. So Elon Musk is ultimately, like Lewis and Clark, a trailblazer, and he's trailblazing a path for other people to follow. That is his legacy. He's using SpaceX to trailblaze a path for humanity into the new frontier of the solar system. It's like, it's not Christopher Columbus, more like Amerigo Vespucci, or whoever, any of those people who were sent over to the New World in, you know, the 1400s. But even though there was already human beings here in the New World anyway, doesn't matter. Imagine what would happen if we find out that there are remnants of human beings who used to be on the moon, or human beings who used to be on Mars. That'd be crazy. Especially when considering, or maybe even an alien race, you know. The book series called Altered Carbon would call those the Elders, right? The Book of Enoch calls them the Watchers. Very fascinating stuff. If you haven't read the Book of Enoch, I highly recommend it. It's one of the reasons. In fact, I think the Book of Enoch is true, personally. I think it's true. And based on the Book of Enoch, that would, if the Book of Enoch is true, that would basically mean that the Greek pantheon and the Viking pantheon are technically the Watchers, who like turned against God the Creator and decided to mate with women because as angels they didn't get women and only mankind got women, and women are the apex of God's creation, basically. So they were attracted to women and went down and had families with them and gave birth to giants, and then all of a sudden you realize that the Viking pantheon is all about the war between the Nephilim and the giants. And the Nephilim are what, the children of the giants? Or maybe the Nephilim are the giants? I'm not really sure. But there was a war, giant on giant or Nephilim on Nephilim, before God flooded the earth, according to the Book of Enoch. So I guess that would make sense as to why Odin was always against the people of Jotunheim, also known as the Giants. Who knows? And then, like, one of the ancient kings of Sumeria happened to be a giant. Like, Jimmy Corsetti has tons of work and archaeological things to discover about that. Jimmy Corsetti, I think he might be an ENTP, but if he's not, he's definitely an ESFJ. All about that discovery. So the body temple is the most concrete of 4 temples. It has a physical element. This dyad is interested in things that can be brought into the real or reflect reality at a fundamental level. That is what the theory of relativity actually is. The theory of relativity was utilized as a way for people to, figure out how time works in relation to light and distance, speed of light, that kind of thing. And it was all very metaphysical, and Einstein came to these conclusions as a result of just doing logical thought experiments in his head. He wasn't able to concretely prove it, but then it was concretely proven in 2020 with photos of light being bent around a black hole, which proved his theory, and photos that were taken by a telescope here on the Earth. Really fascinating. You guys might want to try to look. So let's discuss the essence of gluttony as a deadly sin. What is gluttony? The entire deadly sin and limiting virtue for the ESFJ and INTP can be viewed through the mechanism of consumption versus creation. Gluttony obviously falls on the consumption side. What is gluttony? It's defined by excessive eating and drinking, or a person who eats and drinks excessively or voraciously, right? A person with a remarkably great desire or capacity for something, like going to Mars, Elon Musk. However, these definitions are too specific. Gluttony is simply just overindulgence. It is consuming more than you produce. Like the king, the opposite of the king archetype of the mature masculine, according to king, warrior, magician, lover. But in the same way that lust is not just about sex, gluttony is not just about food or drink. Gluttony is an attempt to fill the hole of identity, or quite frankly, like one's purpose, or fill the hole of like, hey, what is my legacy going to be? If there's no legacy to be left behind, well, may as well consume, right? That's ultimately what it's about. Yes, INTPs and ESFJs do use gluttony to satisfy their need for exploration. But ESFJs and INTPs are also defined by what they consume. And the easiest way they can bond with other people is over interests in shared consumption. Like MMORPGs. We talked about INTP men getting with ENFJ women on MMORPGs. It happens all the time. Right? And the easiest way they can bond with other people is over interest in shared consumption. Oh, you like that movie too? Oh, you like that video game too? Oh, you like Krispy Kreme as well? Consumption is not trivial to them, it is them. ESFJs and INTPs are completely defined by what they consume. And consuming the same thing with other people is actually how they connect with other people. That's huge. But as you can see, that can lead to addiction. What if that thing they're consuming is cocaine? What if that thing they're consuming is heroin? You see what I'm saying, folks? What if it's illicit sex? Further, if they don't feel purposeful, for example, seeking the complementary origin in the other half of the body temple, they'll fall into gluttony. However, gluttony can be used well. It can be used for good. In fact, gluttony is necessary for the living virtue of generativity to be expressed. How? Because ESFJs and INTPs need to consume in order to create. They have to fill their SI child or their SI parent with experiences. This empowers their extrovert intuition to ultimately create a better future. So let's look at our example of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, but from the direction of the poles. And I've already talked about the 2 poles, servility versus hedonism, right? So the first pole, which is servility, and that's defined by an excessive willingness to serve or please others. The biggest people pleasers of all the types are ESFJs and INTPs, and that's also by design. Servility, or gluttony, servile also means to be slavishly submissive or obsequious. This is why INTP men are extremely feminine. This is why ESFJ women are in extremely high demand amongst masculine men, because they are so submissive. They're so submissive. They want to discover every facet of their sexuality. The same thing goes for INTPs, even though INTPs, they're behind the scenes and they will not often admit to it. But it's a fact. So, gluttony is expressed through servility as an overindulgence of self-sacrifice. Servility represses one's passions, and when expressed through gluttony, the ESFJ and INTP consumes and carries out others' desires in order to please them. Gluttonous servility occurs when the ESFJ and INTP has no filter between other people's desires and their own duty, which happens all the time because they lack extroverted thinking. They don't really have that much of a filter. They become gluttonous consumers of appreciation and often become entitled to gratitude and reciprocation. This is why these two types covert contract all the time. And that's why ESFJ, they're covert contracting, you can almost expect it. You can also expect it from an INTP, it's just more subtle. It's very covert, it's not as overt like an ESFJ. That's why INTPs will pull out the chair out from under you, because it's like, I'm entitled to your gratitude. You're not giving it to me? Well, I'm going to destroy everything I built for you. I'm going to destroy the legacy I left behind for you. Okay? Gluttony expressed through servility is the epitome of the crusader doormat. That's how these people become doormats. They find discovery in basically being other people's bitch. But when gluttonous servility is consistently performed as a way of life, they will only discover chains. They're ultimately a slave. Just like that guy at the bottom of the basement in that movie Office Space. It's playing on that obvious INTP archetype, because he's being gluttonous with his servility. The second pole, hedonism. Hedonism is defined by the doctrine that pleasure or happiness is the highest good. Devotion to pleasure as a way of life. Gluttony expressed through hedonism is consuming whatever substance, media, or food, drugs, sex, alcohol, the ESFJ or the INTP wants in extreme excess. Gluttony through humanism follows Freud's pleasure principle, seeking instant gratification of the five senses to whatever extreme to keep the pleasure coming. Gluttony through hedonism achieves discovery by discovering every kind of pleasure or rediscovering old pleasures through experiencing them again and again and again. The ESFJ and INTP become connoisseurs and conquistadors of pleasure. They find discovery there. This is why they struggle with addiction. This is ultimately why they have a struggle not letting go. This is how they ultimately commit idolatry, because whatever they're hedonistic about becomes their idol and they worship at its feet. It's all about overindulgence. And the only way to cure hedonism is fasting. They have to fast from the MMORPGs. They have to fast from food. And it's so interesting how that is, because like Dr. Eric Berg's 1 meal a day keto, where you eat as much as you can for one meal without going above 20 grams of carbohydrates in that one meal, and then you wait till the following day. That's really the only way that these obese ESFJ and INTP people will ever be able to get back down to a normal, healthy weight level. And then from there, they can build themselves up with proper weight training and measuring their food every day. But again, it still requires discipline. The discipline to fast. And the same discipline that they have to do 1 meal a day, or OMAD, is the same discipline that they would need to be able to go to the gym consistently, measure their food, measure their calories, measure their macronutrients, eat organic, non-GMO food, in order to actually have a very nice, attractive physique, right? Well, let's discuss the living virtue of generativity. What is generativity? Generativity does not have an official definition, so we'll use to generate and generative to construct a definition. To generate basically means to bring into existence, to cause to be, to produce, to create and distribute vitally and profusely, to reproduce, to procreate. Why do you think ESFJ women have so many children? Like, I know this ESFJ, her name's Marianne. She has 8 children. She has 8 children in the United States of America. That just doesn't happen. Well, it happens to her because she's an ESFJ. To be generative is defined by being capable of producing or creating, or pertaining to the production of offspring. Think about Elon Musk. Doesn't he have 9 children? Think about that. This is why Elon Musk is an INTP, folks. Most people out there say, no, there's no way Elon Musk is an INTP. He really is. You can see it right here with his deadly sin and living virtue. Come on, folks. Okay? If gluttony is consumption, then generativity is creation. There is one more vital aspect of generativity. Though the word doesn't have an official definition, generativity is a concept coined by the psychoanalyst Erik Erikson as part of his famous life stages model. For example, according to Science Direct, Erikson coined generativity to mean, quote, the propensity and willingness to engage in acts that promote the well-being of younger generations as a way of ensuring the long-term survival of the species. Sounds a lot like body temple. It's obviously body temple. Leaving legacy behind. Legacy as a result of having children, ensuring your bloodline continues, and your bloodline is huge. The ESFJ and INTP generates inventions, processes, even human beings to ensure that our race can survive and thrive. Like Elon Musk bringing us a frontier to explore in our solar system. Because he understands that we're stir crazy, we have cabin fever as a race because the Earth is basically explored. And we are at risk of destroying ourselves. Unless we can get to the next frontier, we don't have a future. And he understands that. The ESFJ and INTP generates inventions. Generativity is the prerequisite for the thriving future of generations. Future generations. So let's look at the binary expressions of generativity through obviously servility and hedonism. So let's look at the first pole of servility. How is generativity expressed through servility? It is being a slave to someone else while producing value. INTPs are ESFJs who tie themselves to other institutions, military. My INTP friend used to be the guy that would be in charge of the nuclear arsenal. He would service Titan missiles, and then eventually, I forgot what they're called. They're not Patriot missiles, but the next generation of nuclear missiles after the Titans were ultimately discontinued, right? He would service them, and he would do that stationed in the Air Force. They're often taken advantage of and required to pump out productivity like a cow being drained of all its milk. But no wonder the elite treats us like cattle. But unlike gluttonous servility, which becomes a vampire for others' appreciation, generative servility is when the INTP and ESFJ truly believe it's their duty to keep on producing, even while being a slave or treated like cattle. That sucks. This is how servility can be. This is how this living virtue of generativity can be a bad thing, right? Generative servility is the epitome of selflessness. It's like being overly selfless. The ESFJ and INTP will repress their own passion completely while being servile. Now let's look at the second pole. How is generativity expressed through hedonism, for example? Well, how is it possible for generativity to be expressed through hedonism? It's simply a love of one's work. There is an Eastern tradition out of China called Kung Fu. Kung Fu, most people think it's a martial arts style, but it's actually a principle or a way of life. It's a way of life that whatever your hands find to do it with all your might. That's the biblical definition of Kung Fu. It's basically be the absolute best at what you do. Obtain mastery at what you do. Even if it's mastery at cleaning your house, that is Kung Fu. Because you are developing the art of self and the art of impacting the ecosystem, be it your own body or the environment that you're in. It's a very concrete approach, a very concrete way of living, a very concrete principle. It is a part of the body temple. That is Kung Fu, aka a love of one's own work. Those accused of being workaholics who don't feel right about themselves unless they're working, they're likely accessing a part of generative hedonism, okay? But what distinguishes generative servility from generative hedonism is that there must be a genuine pleasure involved in generative hedonism. They are basically gaining dopamine by being productive while being in service or a slave to someone or something or some institution, basically. Those stuck in generative servility may only feel right when they are working, but that is usually motivated out of guilt, not enjoyment. This is another example as to how the living virtue of generativity is actually a bad thing. This quote, for example, choose a job you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. It's literally defines what generative hedonism actually is. So on a broad scale, gluttony equals consumption, generativity equals production, servility equals for them, hedonism means for me. So hedonism is the self bending in towards the self, whereas servility is putting everyone else above you. And ESFJs and INTPs do this consistently. And they end up feeling really, really guilty about themselves when they're having it towards themselves and being very hedonistic, or they become very, very entitled and start covert contracting other people as a result of bitterness when they make it all about other people. Because then it's like all of a sudden their shadow, like the ENTJ shadow or the ISFP shadow of the ESFJ versus the INTP, these shadow archetypes ultimately become entitled. And then they start walking around feeling and believing that people that they have served in the past ultimately owe them. And that's when these people become very manipulative and destructive, to the point of destroying everything that they built for other people in the process, pulling out the chair out from under them. There used to be an INTP who worked for me, and she actually made a podcast, a few episodes of the podcast to like completely trash me or whatever. And that was basically her saying, well, Mr. C.S. Joseph, you owe me. I did all these things for you. To which I look back and I'm like, you really didn't do that much. And your ideas were based off of inexperience. And I'm supposed to be grateful to that? I'm supposed to be grateful for your lackluster contributions? And then you expect me to owe that? And then you just pull the chair out from under me in the process? Well, good, because then I got rid of those things and I moved on and had a better life as a result. Sometimes those things end up working out for the better, you know, when the INTP or even the ESFJ ultimately pulls out the chair out from under you, right? And that too can be a problem. So the point is, folks, this is ultimately how ESFJs and INTPs live their life every single day. And it really just comes from what they're seeking the most in life. They're seeking to explore, they're seeking discovery. And how they get discovery is through their living virtue of generativity or their deadly sin of gluttony, and then the associated poles with how they behave, their shadow pole and their aspiration pole. Servility versus hedonism, where they make it all about themselves or where they make it all about other people. They live their life this way every single day. If you have these people in your life, make sure that there's always something to explore. Make sure there's always something to discover, right? And folks, ESFJs, INTPs, if you're in a situation in your life where you believe or you think that there's nothing left to explore, there's no frontier for you, you're not looking the right places. Go read books. I don't know how many times I hear about ESFJs and INTPs not reading books. The best ESFJs and the best INTPs out there are the ones who constantly read. Elon Musk is no exception. He reads every single day. So make sure you're reading. Sometimes he's got reading down to a system where he ends up reading summary after summary after summary of all these different books, getting all their main ideas and moving to the next thing, because he needs as much knowledge as he can in order to ultimately reach his biggest goal, which is create or trailblaze to the next frontier, which is our solar system. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, one of his Star Trek films was titled The Final Frontier. Or in the introduction of many Star Trek episodes, space, the final frontier, as said by William Shatner playing Captain Kirk, or Patrick Stewart as Captain Picard, or any other captain within the Star Trek universe. Because it was originally Zefram Cochrane's, the creator of warp drive and space travel, for humanity. It was from his speech. Guess what? He too was an INTP. You could often think that the character that represents Gene Roddenberry the most, the creator of Star Trek the most, was Zefram Cochrane, the creator of warp drive. You see? Because it's all about that frontier. So sometimes ESFJs, INTPs, if you don't have a frontier you can explore, then make one. If you make one, you will always be free, and you will always get that which you seek the most, which is exploration and discovery. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, or enlightening, please leave a comment below.
thank you all for watching. I hope this was very enlightening for you guys' lives, and will help you have better relationships with this dyad, as well as if you are a member of this dyad as an ESFJ or an INTP, that you too will also have a better life as a result. So anyway, folks, with all that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.